Tariq bin Ziyad in 711 CE, in the year 92 Hijri, landed at Gibraltar, also known as Jabal Tariq. And then within 4 years, most of the peninsula was taken by a coalition of Berbers from North Africa, in particular Morocco, and Arabs. 7,000 Berbers, 5,000 Arabs, led by Tariq bin Ziyad. They took the entire peninsula within 4 years. And then followed chaos for some years, leading up to the leadership of Abdurrahman the First, an Umayyad prince, one of the grandsons of Hisham bin Abdul Malik, one of the most powerful Umayyad caliphs, who ruled from 105 to 125 Hijri, 20 years he ruled from Damascus. Abdurrahman the First, also known as Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, and also known as Saqrul Quraysh, in other words, the hawk, the falcon of Quraysh. He escaped Damascus because the Abbasid revolution was wiping out the Umayyads. The Umayyads were being exterminated. Abdurrahman the First, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, was a young man in his early 20s escaping from this onslaught. He made his way to Al-Andalus, long story short, and they chose him as the Emir to stabilize the country, because the country was going through chaos, because there was chaos at the center in Damascus, and beyond there was chaos in one of the provinces called Al-Andalus. Abdurrahman I arrives in Al-Andalus and he stabilizes the country, and he establishes his own emirate, and he rules from Cordoba, the city of Qartaba, and he establishes a masjid which stands to this day, and now it is a cathedral. Why? Because when the Christians took it later on, they built a cathedral right in the middle of the masjid. The masjid pretty much stands intact. You can go and look at the masjid. The pillars are there, the arches are there, the mihrab is there. So you can see the structure of the masjid still standing to this day, built in the 8th century by Abdurrahman I. And then followed a period of relative stability. Umayyad Amirs ruled Spain from Cordoba for about 300 years, and in 1031 the Umayyad Caliphate fell. And then followed a period of Muluk al-Tawaif. Muluk al-Tawaif literally means petty kingdoms. So when the center fell, then when the institution of Khilafah was abolished in Spain, first it was an emirate or an imara established by the Umayyads. Then in the 10th century, one of the descendants of Abdurrahman I, called Abdurrahman III, claimed to be the Khalifa, the Caliph of the Muslims in Al-Andalus, because the Caliphate in Baghdad had declined and there was another rival Caliphate in North Africa called the Fatimid Caliphate, the Shia Ismaili Fatimid Caliphate, which was threatening the state of Al-Andalus. So to counter that claim of caliphate, as the Abbasids had declined by this time in the mid-10th century, Abdurrahman III, he claims to be a caliph. I am the caliph now of the Muslims. And he establishes a very powerful state. He invades North Africa to fight the Ismailis, the caliphate of the Ismailis, and he becomes very strong. So a lot of Muslims start to support him because of this claim. And then this caliphate lasted for another century. In 1031 it was abolished, when Ibn Hazm, a great scholar of Islam, was alive, very famous scholar. So after this caliphate was abolished, the Muslim state of Al-Andalus, or the Muslim entity or principality of Al-Andalus, split into petty kingdoms, many petty kingdoms. And this period is called Muluk al-Tawaif, kings of petty kingdoms, right? Group principalities. So a small state, for example, would appoint an Emir, and that Emir would claim to be the king, and the kings sometimes claim to be caliphs. So this division among the Muslims, political division, because all of them were fighting for their little petty states to basically protect their petty interests, they were divided. And the Christian North, the Catholic North by this time, had gained impetus to take the land back from the Muslims. So they launched a campaign called Reconquista. In other words, the reconquest. So they started to take land back from the Muslims. And this process started in the mid-11th century. 1066, one of the major strongholds of the Muslims in the north, called Babastro, was taken. Then 1085, the city of Toledo, also known as Tolaitala, was taken. And then for a while, the Murabitun or the Al-Murabitun from North Africa, they intervened and they stopped, they checked the advance of the Catholics. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, a famous Murabitun leader, he led the armies of North African Muslims from Morocco into Spain to help the Muslims of Spain, because there was one of the rulers of the city of Seville, his name was Al-Mu'tamid. He had invited Al-Murabitun to come and stop this Christian advance coming from the north. Al-Murabitun came, they took the land, and they were completely blown away when they saw the lifestyle of the Muslims in Spain. Muslims of Spain had reached the peak of civilization in worldly sense, in material sense. In material terms, they had reached the peak of human development, achievement, civilization, and there was nothing better than that in the world. So these desert Bedouins from North Africa, when they came in to help the Muslims, they saw the palaces, the fountains, and all the luxury. The Muslims, they said, no wonder you're losing land. No wonder you're losing land. Because look at you, how you live. How are you going to fight these wild people coming from the north? They are battle hardened. They are tougher than you are. You're all in your music and dancing and poetry and books and all of that, which is good. When books at least are good, not the rest, right? But this is why you're losing land. But what happens with these people? They also become victims 2 generations down the line of the same problem. Al-Murabitun also become, accustomed to that culture. Then come Al-Muwahidun from North Africa again, another dynasty. They also take land in Al-Andalus. They remove the Al-Murabitun from power and they take power, Al-Muwahidun. It is then when the greatest disaster takes place. In 1212, the year 1212, a battle takes place between Al-Muwahidun and the Spanish kingdoms, a coalition of northern Christian Spanish kingdoms. They fight a battle called the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. Okay, Las Navas de Tolosa. 1212, this battle took place. And Al-Muwahidun lost the battle. The king of Seville, also known as Ishbiliya, loses the battle against a coalition of Christian kings coming from the north. And that loss resulted in the loss of 3 major cities or principalities of Muslims in Al-Andalus: Valencia, Seville, and Cordoba. All of these 3 cities fall to Christians one after another in 1230s, between 1230s to 1250s. Okay, 1230 to 1250, within these 20 years, Christian kingdoms from the north, they take these 3 major principalities of Muslims. Initially, the Muslims who came to live under Christians or under Christian kingdoms, they were called Mudijars. And this term was taken from the Arabic word al-Mudajjar. Al-Mudajjar basically meant people allowed to remain. The population of Muslims in Spain in the 11th century was 5 million people. 5 million people. So imagine now these Christians have come from the north and they have taken cities after cities from the Muslims. Due to their weaknesses, their political divide, and their petty gains and their petty concerns and ambitions, they are divided, they are broken. The Christians take advantage and they come and they take all this land from the Muslims. And this is what they were waiting for centuries, the Catholics from the north. The popes ruling from Rome were always pushing the Christian kings from the north to take as much land as possible. Their goal was always to exterminate Islam from Spain, to destroy Islam completely, or expel Islam or any traces of Islam from Spain. This is what the papacy had been doing. And it were the popes who launched the crusade as a campaign, and many crusades took place from Northern Europe to the Middle East. And many crusades were launched against the Muslims of Spain as well. So Al-Mudajjars or Al-Mudajar, which was the term used for Muslims living under Christian kings, initially they were allowed to live with their faith. The Christian kings who came to rule Muslim territories initially were very much inspired by the Muslim civilization. Muslim civilization was one of the greatest achievements of humanity at that time. There were great achievements in Spain when it comes to Christians, Muslims and Jews. All three faiths prospered in Spain. They lived side by side. They shared knowledge with each other. Great libraries were produced, great scholars were produced, great scientists, philosophers, intellectuals, thinkers, imams, theologians, muhaddithin, mufakkirin, muballighin, and the list goes on. All sorts of subjects and fields of knowledge were taught in Al-Andalus in Spain during the Muslim period. And Jews and Christians benefited immensely from this knowledge in Spain. So this was the golden age of not only Islam, but the golden age of the Jews also. The Jews prospered under the domain of Islam for almost 700 to 800 years. So long as the Muslims were ruling, the Jews prospered. Every time the Christians took the land from the north, the Jews started to feel threatened. In fact, they were expelled from many places repeatedly. So the Jews found refuge with Muslims. Muslims were protecting the Jewish people in Spain for hundreds of years. And these were the most civilized Jews in the world. They were the most sophisticated Jews in the world. And they found protection with Muslims. In fact, Bahya bin Paquda, one of the Jewish rabbis, writes in 1180s, writing from Cordoba, when the city of Cordoba is still in Muslim hands, he writes that our living conditions, if not the same as Muslim living conditions, but even better in some cases. Even better. Our living conditions are in some cases even better. So when the Christians came in, they saw that the Muslims have established something amazing. Their libraries, their palaces, their civilization, their scholarship, their books, their universities, their institutions, they kept them as they were. In fact, they started to translate these books, these works into Latin, and they started to ship this knowledge to the north. Then slowly this attitude started to change when more and more land was taken. 1250s onwards, there was only one stronghold left in Spain called Granada, also known as Granada or Grenada. So Granada lasted for nearly 250 years as the last stronghold of Islam in Al-Andalus in Spain. And they kept a good relationship with northern Christian territories, but Islam was very strong in Granada. Islam was the way of life. The law of Islam was still applied. Scholars continued to flourish in Granada. Many books from the northern regions Muslims had authored, written, transcribed. They ended up in Granada because Granada was the last stronghold. Many Muslims were actually emigrating to Granada from the north because this was Muslim territory. It was easy for them to live with Muslims. So it was a very strong place and it was naturally protected. If you go to the city of Granada today, you will see it is surrounded by mountains. It is right next to famous mountain range in Spain called Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada is very close to Granada, and Granada as a city is naturally protected by the mountains, natural fortresses. That's why the Christian kingdoms from the north could not take it for so long. But then in the 15th century, cut the long story short, fast forward, 1492 is the year, actually 1482. Because this crusade against the state of Granada continued for 10 years. For 10 years, two Christian states launched a crusade against the last stronghold of Islam in Spain. And these two states were Aragon and Castile. Aragon was ruled by a king called Ferdinand or Fernando, and Castile was ruled by a queen called Isabella or Isabel. Both of them joined hands through marriage, and they decided that they will wipe out the Muslim traces from Al-Andalus. Isabella was a die-hard crusader. She was a very staunch Catholic, and she wanted to remove any trace of Islam from Al-Andalus, and she saw this as a mission of her life. before she died, she wanted to achieve this. A crusade is launched in 1482. 10 years, the Muslims from Gharnata are resisting this onslaught. A massive coalition is attacking them and they are resisting for 10 long years. There are battles taking place from castle to castle. They are taking fortresses, castles, cities, one after another, and they're not stopping. And Muslims are doing their best to do something about it. And one of the reasons why this is taking place is the fall of Constantinople. In 1453, Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih has taken the city of Constantinople from the Christians. And Christian Europe or Christendom was shaken to the core. What are we going to do now? The Turks are at our doorstep. And then shivers went down the spines of these Catholic monarchs in Spain. And the Pope was also shivering. So they were in fear that if the Ottomans woke up one day and realized, hold on a second, we have a Muslim ally in the Iberian Peninsula and we can easily land our armies because they controlled a lot of this coastal area. Hundreds of miles of Spanish coastal area was in the state of Gharnata. They had this fear, so they wanted to wipe out this last stronghold. 10 years they started. Then in 1490, they started to negotiate with the last ruler of Gharnata to surrender the city because they couldn't take it. They had besieged the city of Gharnata for 1 year. And this was the largest army ever assembled against Muslims in Spain for reconquista, for the reconquest of the land from the Muslims. And this story is very disturbing, wallahi. If you go to Spain, which I did just less than a week ago, I was in Spain, and it was a very emotional experience, wallahi. Looking at those palaces, those Islamic sites, all the verses of the Quran on the walls. Some people say if there was a fourth holiest site of Islam, it would have been Qartaba. And it's not an overstatement. It's not an overstatement. You go and look at the Masjid of Qartaba in Al-Andalus, you will see why. It was the largest masjid in the world for some centuries. It was larger than Masjid al-Haram, Masjid al-Nabawi and Masjid al-Aqsa. It was the largest masjid in the world. The compound still stands for the last 1,300 years it has stood strong. The pillars are there, the arches are there. The names of the people who carved the pillars are there. You will see the names of the people who carved those pillars in the 8th century. Umar, Mas'ud, Mubarak. These are the names I read myself. And some of the pillars have written the word Lillah is inscribed on the pillar. Why? The person wanted to carve the pillar for the sake of Allah. Didn't want his name to be mentioned. And it still stands. 1490, Ferdinand and Isabella, they speak or negotiate with the last ruler of Gharnata called Abu Abdullah, also known as Boabdil. In Western sources or Spanish sources, it's called Boabdil. It's a corruption of the word Abu Abdullah. He was the last ruler of Gharnata. So Abu Abdullah, long story short, doesn't stand his ground despite the advice by his generals and his people to fight to death. Abu Abdullah lost hope. He knew there is no chance that they can resist any longer. Long story short, he capitulates. He agrees to terms and he hands over the keys to Ferdinand and Isabella. And now there are hundreds of thousands of Muslims living in Gharnata, in the city of Granada. They're not aware what's happening. They don't know. One day they wake up to Christian armies marching through the streets of Gharnata. And Christians are ringing bells from the tallest buildings in Gharnata. They are firing guns to announce they're coming. And they're singing songs of joy while the Muslims are watching in silence, in fear. They don't know what's going to happen now to them. One of the reasons why Abu Abdullah capitulated was that he believed the promise of these monarchs. The terms they agreed upon were, for example, these are the terms that were agreed upon. Before he capitulated, before he surrendered the city of Gharnata to Aragon and Castile, a coalition of these two kingdoms, or a coalition of a husband and a wife, both of whom happened to be the rulers of these two kingdoms, Ferdinand and Isabella. He put these terms forward and they were readily accepted. So before the surrender, these are the terms that were put forward. That both great and small should be perfectly secure in their persons, families and properties. That they should be allowed to continue in their dwellings and residences, whether in the city, the suburbs, or any other part of the country. That their laws should be preserved as they were before, and that no one should judge them except by those same laws. That their mosques and the religious endowments appertaining to them should remain as they were in the times of Islam. That no Christian should enter the house of a Muslim or insult him in any way. That no Christian or Jew holding public offices by the appointment of the late Sultan should be allowed to exercise his functions or rule over them. That all Muslim captives taken during the siege of Gharnata from whatever part of the country they might have come, but especially the nobles and chiefs mentioned in the agreement, should be liberated. That such Muslim captives as might have escaped from their Christian masters and taken refuge in Gharnata should not be surrendered, but that the Sultan should be bound to pay the price of such captives to their owners. That all those who might choose to cross over to Africa should be allowed to take their departure within a certain time and be conveyed there in the king's ships, and without any tax being imposed on them beyond the mere charge for passage. So these are the terms. Why did I read all these terms to you? So that you realize why the Muslims surrendered the city and what was agreed upon. And they were expecting good treatment from these kings and queens. But Ferdinand and Isabella had no intention to keep these terms. They just wanted the territory. They wanted to occupy the lost stronghold of Islam in Spain. And thenceforth, they would do what they want, or what they wanted. As soon as the city of Gharnata was taken, the Muslims were initially tolerated. They were initially tolerated because the new rulers didn't want any disturbance. They could see that these are a very deeply religious people, and we cannot possibly start changing them straight away. And what happened when these monarchs took the city? Firstly, there were two bishops that came in. The bishop of the city of Gharnata was appointed, and his name was Hernando de Talavera. Hernando de Talavera was appointed as the bishop of the city of Gharnata, a Christian bishop, and his approach was to reason with Muslims, preach the Catholic faith to them, and try to convince them about Catholicism. Possibly not realizing, because many Christian clergy at the time were very ignorant of Islam and Muslims, possibly not realizing that these people they are trying to convert, some of them are scholars of Christianity. They have written books refuting Christianity. So how are you going to convert someone like that? Someone who's writing books on Christianity. There are books upon books in the libraries of Gharnata. Hundreds of thousands of volumes in the Arabic language. How are you going to convert them? So this is the attitude he had. Hernando de Talavera. Then what happens is another bigot who takes over from him. Okay, Archbishop of Toledo, the city of Toledo in the north, he has a different idea. He comes and joins Hernando de Talavera. He comes and joins him. His name is Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros. Cisneros comes and he starts to arrest Muslim influentials and tortures them. Starts to torture them and forces Christianity on them. And he succeeds. By torturing many influential Muslims, they convert to Islam under duress, under torture. And then he reports to the Pope that I have converted hundreds, possibly thousands of people by torturing to Christianity. So they are encouraged now. They want to change the policy. They want to push Muslims. So the policy changes. Muslims are now harassed in the city of Gharnata. Muslims are being told to do things they don't want to do. Muslims are being told to baptize, to leave their faith. This results in a revolt. In 1499, literally 7 years after the city of Gharnata is taken, there's a revolt. Okay? And this revolt goes on for another 2 years until 1501, when this revolt is crushed. And now all gloves taken off. Gloves taken off. Okay? Now these Christian monarchs, they feel that they don't have to keep any treaties. They don't have to honor any treaties, any agreements made with the Muslims. So this agreement I read in front of you was thrown into the bin. It was cancelled because of the revolt. Revolt was used as an excuse, even though the revolt was caused by Catholic behavior against the Muslims in Gharnata. That wasn't considered, and these terms were cancelled, and now a choice was given to Muslims: expulsion, conversion, or death. You choose. You convert to Christianity, Catholicism, you get baptized, or you leave the country for another country, which wasn't easy at the time, of course, or you die. Which one is it? Many, in fact, the majority choose conversion. They pretend to become Christians. These are the people who are known as the Moriscos.